So in the last few years, the term sleeping on something has become fairly popular, or at least a fairly common way to express that something needs a little bit more attention. So you can imagine people saying like, oh, they're sleeping on that dish that I made the other day, or they're sleeping on this artist that I heard the other day. I mean, I usually sleep on your mother, but that's beside the point. Anyway, today I want to show 5 different plugins that are sleeper plugins, aka plugins that people may have or that they may know about or maybe even not have and not know about, but that should see much more use in modern day production. So for this project, I have a little bit of an example here. Now, this isn't psytrance. I kind of went back a little bit more into my roots and made some dubstep.
I hate everything you stand for.
I don't know if it's any good. If you guys want to see me make more dubstep and actually, try and really do an attempt of some dubstep, that would be cool, maybe as a challenge or something. But for now, this is the demo that we have. So there's some interesting things going on with the sound design and all of that kind of stuff, but the main thing that I want to talk about today is going to be the plugins. Starting off with SerumFX. As you can see, I have employed 3 different versions of SerumFX here. And let's be honest here, what is the last time that you used SerumFX in one of your productions? Because as you can see, if I go into the normal Serum, we have some cool sound design going on. This is obviously like a growl thing, so we're modulating basically everything with this one LFO here. And then we have a bunch of different effects. We have some distortion, we have some multiband to really bring it out. But just on its own, if I turn off all of the processing on this bass sound is going to sound fairly weak. And if I turn it on, of course, it's going to sound much, much fatter. And you can hear, of course, also some extra effects being added. And that is because SerumFX basically allows you to stack multiple effect chains. One of the big criticisms that I've heard over the years for Serum is that for every effect that you have here, you can really only use it once. Like you cannot have 2 hyper dimensions within the same patch. So that is where SerumFX comes in. Now in this case, I'm using the very first one for this little bit of comb filtering here so that we have a bit of a variation to the bass sound. You can hear that kind of laser sound towards the end there. We also have the second one, which is another effect. And you can see here I'm using some LFOs to again kind of make a growl idea in that we're basically just modulating everything with one LFO that is going to basically do the main movements. And you can hear that we're essentially getting a little bit of extra movement out of this in the very first step. And then finally, the one where I'm most proud of is the actual kind of fat rack that I made for this bass. So this is really used to kind of beef up the sound. So without it, it sounds like this. Of course, a sound like this definitely needs some extra beef, definitely needs a little bit of extra stereo interest as well. So that is all that this is doing. We also have the sidechaining in here, which I'm implementing right over here. And there's some cool things that you can do with the sidechaining in that you make it a little bit stronger. So this is responsible for the sidechaining on the double kick that is happening over here. Essentially what we're doing is we're both altering the shape as well as the timing here so that it just fits with the kicks there. And the way that we're doing the sidechaining, obviously you need a level here. And for those that don't know, inside of Serum, you can click this to get a level for every mix. And these are independent, so both of them will still work. If you set the mix lower here, you can still edit the level and both of them will work the way that you think of it. This, by the way, also works in this filter over here where you can see we can set level and mix. And of course, that is true in both the SerumFX version as well as the main Serum version. The main thing that I wanted to say here is that you can really do some extra cool stuff, as I showed with some of these audio examples, by just using extra versions of Serum and just using those effects. Because generally speaking, it is true that you don't get that fatness out of Serum itself. Even if we go into the processing here, we still have like the multiband and the distortion and whatnot, but you don't really get the beefiness that you want for this type of music. But just by stacking some of those effects on top of each other and adding a little bit of extra interest with some of these other ones, you can definitely get a sound that is very, very interesting. Now, before we continue with the plugins, I do quickly want to say that I'm trying to reach a subscriber goal of 30,000 subscribers this year. So if you want to help me with that, make sure that you subscribe down below, maybe tell a couple of your friends, stuff like that. Also, just leaving comments and liking the video, that also helps, as it's definitely boosting the videos in the algorithm. But with that said, let's get back into some interesting plugins. Now, the reason why I talked about this first is because it is probably a free plugin for you. Most people have Serum installed, and therefore you also have SerumFX. Another free plugin though that you might not have is Freeclip. And this is the plugin that I'm using in this particular project to implement the clip to zero method. What I mean by that isn't really important, but it is a mixing strategy where you're essentially clipping everything in a certain way. If you want to learn much more about that, you would need to look at the content of the inventor of this method, which is Bathrometrics, who I've shouted out earlier on this channel and make some amazing content on this kind of stuff, on this kind of loud music and how you actually mix and master that kind of music. But essentially, we're just using it to hard clip in various different stages. So basically, everything is going to have a clipper at the end here. We have a clipper over here. Individual drums may have a clipper. There might be a soft clipper in here as well. But there are definitely some more clippers in here. And then, of course, there's also a final clipper right before the mastering chain. But just going over this plugin, there's some really cool things why I think that this is one of the better free clipping plugins. For a start, it has oversampling, and a lot of other clipping plugins that I use either don't have it or they have it as like a paid version. There's like a paid version with extra features where there comes oversampling, and then there's a free version that doesn't have that oversampling, but this just has it. So if you need oversampling, here's where you do that. We also have a bunch of different clipping algorithms here. So if you want to have more creative clipping or more softer clipping, you can use that as well. But in general, I use this plugin personally for my hard clipping, and I use it almost every mix, I would say. Even in my sideline stuff, it is definitely going on stuff like my drums, and even in my final mastering chain, which I talked about earlier in the year. So really, this is that kind of plugin that is just like a little one-trick pony that I sometimes like to use, but it does that one thing very, very well. The next plugin that I used in this production that is really a sleeper plugin, in my opinion, is Transgressor. This is more of an effect that I would say than it is a particular plugin, because there's multiple different plugins that do this. But essentially what we have is we have transient and sustain dependent EQing. So what that means is that we can EQ the very start of any sound versus the rest of the sound, like the body of the sound. And in this case, I'm using it to just beef up the kick a little bit more, giving it a little bit more high end in a transient at the very beginning where we really want that snap out of it. And then in the low frequencies, we just add a little bit of extra sustain. One of the very cool things that this plugin does that I haven't seen many other like transient EQs do is that you actually have very fine control over the release and when like transients stop being transient. So first of all, there's the detector here, which generally speaking just works well. You don't really have to do anything to get it to detect the things that you need to detect, in my opinion. Like I tend to use this plugin also a lot on my psytrance basslines, but I never really find myself working with the detector. Like I don't have to dial in any different settings from what it loads up by default. But then shaping the tonality of something and how these two EQ curves are applied to like the whole of the signal, it is very important that you set proper release timings and proper holds here. And that is really where this plugin shines, because it's just so easy to dial that stuff in. So just having a listen here. You can hear that as I turn this up, it is going to apply more this EQ, and therefore we get less of that boost. That is the main place where I notice it. And the way that it's going to work is that for the hold, it is going to keep just applying this EQ over here. And for the release stage, it is kind of going to crossfade between them. So of course, as you can imagine, a release, it is actually going down in envelope, in amplitude usually, if you talk about an envelope. And in this case, that is exactly what it's going to do. It's going to turn down the effect of this EQ and then slowly bring up the effect of this EQ. So it's really cool to kind of craft this envelope between these two different EQs that you have. And this is definitely something that at least I myself find myself using in most of my projects. The next plugin that I want to show is going to be a little bit expensive, but I think it's going to be worth the price. It is going to apply to this sound over here. And the plugin that I'm talking about is MTurboReverb. Now, for those that watch my stream or have been longer time viewers of my content, they will definitely know this plugin because I use it all the time. In fact, it is really the only reverb plugin that I ever use. I say really the only reverb plugin because like the last few projects, I've just used this plugin. And every once in a while you come across like, oh, I really need something like a black hole, or I really need some very specific kind of reverb. But 99.9% of the reverb that I use is courtesy of this particular plugin here. So yes, as I said, it is a little bit expensive, but considering the fact that you can basically just buy this and use that as your reverb and never have to buy another reverb plugin ever again is really amazing. And the way that that works is because it is not just like different reverb presets that you see over here. These are actually different algorithms. So this is a different algorithm, this is a different algorithm, this is a different algorithm. It's basically like having all of these as individual plugins, but you just have that in one plugin. Now within each of the reverbs, of course, as you can see, you have a massive amount of control over the exact reverb type that you want and the exact way that you want the reverb to sound. And I find myself actually dialing in some of these settings and really becoming familiar with how some of the reverb settings work, especially stuff like early versus late reflections, the dampening stuff, and all of the stuff that you see over here. But of course, also the importance of filtering and the EQing of the highs and the lows in the reverb is very, very important. And in this particular case, also the sub-algorithm that you're choosing, because yes, every algorithm that you have over here also comes with sub-algorithms. So you can select multiple different flavors of the same algorithm. You can hear those kind of nice textual changes between the different algorithms that we're using here. And really, this should be enough control to basically dial in any reverb that you want. But that's not where this plugin ends, because if you really wanted to, you could dive even deeper into a plugin like this by hitting the edit button here. And now you get to design your own reverb algorithm. So here you can see this is the actual individual early reflections that this reverb uses. Here is the actual algorithm used for this particular reverb, together with this one over here. So if you wanted to, you could learn this scripting language over here and you could just actually build your own reverb that nobody else is going to have. And then of course you can dive deeper into individual settings if you ever need to. You can EQ it more, you can do mid-side processing if you need to. All of that good stuff is available over here. There's also a dynamic section on this page where you can duck the reverb to the incoming sound and that kind of stuff. In this case, we're compressing the reverb to itself, but again, you could also duck it out of the way of the original signal if you want to. And overall, this plugin, as I said, is so versatile and there's so many different settings in here that over the last few years, it is 99.9% of my reverbs and it just does everything that you need it to. Like if you need a huge space, something like this maybe. It is still ringing out, it's incredible. But there's also cool emulations of both plate reverbs and spring reverbs. We have some very cool creative reverbs over here that can create some really cool different textures. And then of course you have stuff like the shimmer reverb and that kind of stuff. Finally, it also comes with this 2D positioning, like it allows you to position sounds actually within a space. So if you want to position the sound actually on a stage or something like that, you can go in here and then you can actually set the position of where you want the sound to be. So that's definitely very, very cool. And just in general, I cannot recommend this plugin enough for anybody that actually wants to be really, really granular with their reverbs. But again, just clicking an algorithm, setting up your dry wet also just works fine. The last plugin I also mentioned in my mastering tutorial where I talked about the final limiter. For the last 4 to 5 years now, I've been using this boost by Ursa DSP. And it's really funny how this began because I was actually sponsored by them. And I've now been like making content with this plugin on and I've just been using it and praising it because it's just that good. It is a very, very transparent kind of limiter, but not in a way that normal limiters are very transparent. It definitely has its own kind of like algorithm to it. And one of the cool features that it has is this focus here, where you can actually focus the limiting more on the quiet background sounds versus the foreground sounds. So there's definitely like a sense of space control within your final limiter, which is a feature that is really, really cool in my opinion. And then of course, even when trying to get stuff very, very loud, this plugin just handles that very well and it gives a very clean, crisp loudness, which I really like. Especially for sidevents, that is very important because we tend to get very loud masters without any distortion in them. Again, I talked about that more in the actual mastering video. But in general, for a mastering limiter, just having found something like this, and I don't really see anybody else using it, it is just really, really good at what it does. And I just put it on everything that I need to master, and it just becomes loud as I want it to. Of course, you need to get your settings right, and you need to get, the oversampling, and sometimes the attack and the release, you have to dial it in exactly how you want it to. But it is still very, very powerful and very easy to use as well. So those were the plugins that I wanted to talk about today. A little bit of a different video, but I hope that you enjoy it either way. Let me know if you want more plugin related videos like these kind of top 5 lists or stuff like that. Then I can definitely make those kind of videos. Of course, if you have any other video ideas that you want me to do, you can leave them in the comments as well. Another way to support the channel and be part of the community is by becoming a Patreon of mine. There's some cool perks like early access to videos and a special section in my Discord. And in general, it's an amazing way to support the channel. So thanks for doing so. I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.